Drunk billionaire insults black waitress. What happens next will shock you. What if a single moment of humiliation at a five-star restaurant sparks a movement for workers everywhere? Maya Carter moved through the polished chaos of the Ivory Room, New York City's premier fine dining establishment, with the grace of someone who'd mastered the art of blending in while standing out. At 28, she was a striking figure, tall, with warm brown skin and eyes that held both fire and kindness. Her tightly coiled curls were pulled back into a neat bun, and her crisp black uniform was impeccable, despite the 12-hour shift she'd already endured. Maya had been a waitress here for 3 years, navigating the demands of Manhattan's elite with a smile that hid the weight of her dreams. Raised in Harlem by her single mother, Denise, Maya learned early that life didn't hand out favors. Denise, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep the lights on, had instilled in her daughter a fierce work ethic and an unyielding sense of pride. "You're as good as anyone in any room, Maya," she'd say, her voice steady as steel. "Don't let nobody tell you different." Those words had carried Maya through a childhood of second-hand clothes, late-night study sessions, and the constant hum of a city that never slowed down. They carried her now, as she balanced trays of artisanal cocktails and plates of truffle-infused risotto for people who rarely looked her in the eye. Maya's dream was bigger than the Ivory Room. She wanted to open a non-profit for at-risk youth, a safe haven where kids like the ones she'd grown up with could find mentorship, resources, and hope. She'd been saving every tip, every spare dollar, sketching out plans in a worn notebook she kept in her locker. But dreams like that took time, and time was something Maya rarely had. Between her shifts and the community college classes she took online, her days were a blur of hustle. Still, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, her mother's words echoing in her heart. The Ivory Room was a world of contrasts. Crystal chandeliers glittered above tables draped in white linen, and the clientele, hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls, wore their wealth like armor. Maya had learned to navigate their egos, their impatience, their occasional cruelty. Microaggressions were part of the job, the way a patron might snap their fingers for her attention, or the subtle sneer when she pronounced a French dish perfectly. She'd grown a thick skin, but it didn't make the sting any less real. Tonight, the restaurant was buzzing. A high-profile tech conference had brought in a flood of new faces, and the air crackled with the energy of money and power. Maya moved swiftly, delivering a bottle of vintage Bordeaux to a table of executives, then weaving through the crowd to check on a couple celebrating their anniversary. Her smile never faltered, even as her feet ached and her mind wandered to the grant application she needed to finish by midnight. At table 12, Richard Collins held court. A billionaire real estate tycoon, Collins was a regular at the Ivory Room, known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and a reputation for treating service workers like props. His entourage, 3 men in tailored blazers and a woman in a glittering dress, laughed loudly at his every word, their voices drowning out the soft piano music. Collins was already 3 whiskeys deep, his face flushed, his gestures growing sloppy. Maya approached the table with a tray of appetizers, her expression calm but her senses on high alert. She'd served Collins before. She knew the type. "Good evening, Mr. Collins," she said, setting down a plate of seared scallops. "Can I get you anything else?" Collins barely glanced at her, waving a hand dismissively. "Just keep the drinks coming, sweetheart. And maybe try to move a little faster this time. We're not here to wait." The table erupted in laughter, and Maya felt the familiar burn of humiliation creep up her neck. She forced a smile, nodding. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." As she turned to leave, Collins's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You know, you're kind of a distraction in a place like this," he slurred, loud enough for nearby tables to turn. "This is a high-class joint. Maybe stick to somewhere simpler." The words landed like a punch. The dining room seemed to freeze, the clatter of silverware and murmur of conversation fading as eyes turned toward Maya. Her heart pounded, but she kept her chin high, her mother's voice ringing in her ears. "You're as good as anyone in any room." She wanted to snap back, to tell Collins exactly what she thought of his high-class nonsense, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not when she was so close to her dream. "I'll check on your drinks," she said evenly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. She walked away, her steps measured, her hands trembling as she pushed through the swinging doors to the kitchen. In the kitchen, Maya leaned against a counter, closing her eyes for a moment to steady herself. The head chef, Javier, glanced over from his station. "You okay, Maya?" he asked, his voice gruff but kind. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Just another night, Javi." But it wasn't just another night. Collins's words had cut deeper than the usual snide remarks. They weren't just about her service, they were about her existence, her right to be in a space like the Ivory Room. Maya had fought her whole life to prove she belonged, from the teachers who'd underestimated her in school to the customers who looked through her like she was invisible. She'd clawed her way out of a neighborhood where dreams were often crushed by circumstance, and she wasn't about to let one drunken billionaire unravel her. Back at home, in her small Harlem apartment, Maya's mother, Denise, was her rock. At 52, Denise was a force of nature, tough, warm, and fiercely protective. She'd raised Maya alone after Maya's father left when she was 3, working endless shifts at the hospital to provide for her daughter. Denise had faced her own share of prejudice as a black woman in a demanding field, and she'd taught Maya how to carry herself with pride in a world that often tried to diminish her. Every Sunday, they'd sit together over Denise's famous peach cobbler, talking about Maya's plans for the nonprofit. "You're gonna change lives, baby," Denise would say, her eyes shining with belief. At the Ivory Room, Maya wasn't alone in her struggles. Her coworker, Priya, a first-generation Indian American, understood the unspoken challenges of working in a place that catered to wealth. The two often shared late-night talks in the break room, swapping stories of rude customers and dreams of something bigger. Priya was studying to be a graphic designer, and she'd already sketched a logo for Maya's nonprofit, a vibrant tree with roots spreading wide, symbolizing growth and resilience. Then there was Mrs. Evelyn Thompson, a regular at the Ivory Room who always sat at table 8. At 74, Mrs. Thompson was a retired civil rights lawyer with a quiet intensity and a sharp mind. She'd spent decades fighting for justice, from marching in Selma to arguing cases in courtrooms across the country. She came to the Ivory Room not for the food, but for the memories. It was where she'd celebrated her first big case win 40 years ago. Mrs. Thompson noticed everything, including the way Maya carried herself with grace under pressure. She'd taken a liking to Maya, often slipping her an extra tip with a warm, "Keep shining, dear." The night of the incident, Maya finished her shift with the same professionalism she always brought, but the weight of Collins's words lingered. She served his table flawlessly, ignoring the smirks of his entourage and the occasional glance from other diners. When she finally clocked out at 1 a.m., she stepped into the chilly New York night, her breath visible in the air. The city was alive with taxis and neon lights, but Maya felt alone. She walked to the subway, her mind replaying the moment over and over. A distraction. Somewhere simpler. The words stung because they echoed a lie she'd fought her whole life, that she didn't belong. At home, she sat on her couch, her notebook open to the latest draft of her nonprofit proposal. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting to Collins's sneer, the way the room had gone quiet, the way she'd had to swallow her pride to keep her job. She texted Priya, who responded with a string of angry emojis and a promise to talk tomorrow. Maya's phone buzzed again, a message from her mom. "You okay, baby? Felt a tug in my heart tonight." Maya smiled faintly. Denise always seemed to know when something was wrong. Meanwhile, at table 8, Mrs. Thompson had witnessed the entire exchange. Her hands tightened around her teacup as Collins's words rang out, her jaw set with a familiar resolve. She'd seen too many moments like this in her life. Moments where power and privilege were wielded like weapons against those who couldn't fight back. As Maya walked away, Mrs. Thompson made a decision. She pulled out her phone and began typing an email to her old friend, Clara Nguyen, a journalist at the New York Beacon. Clara had a reputation for exposing injustice, and Mrs. Thompson knew she'd listen. "Clara, I saw something tonight that broke my heart and lit a fire in me all at once." A young woman, a waitress named Maya, was publicly humiliated by Richard Collins at the Ivory Room. He insulted her race, her place in the world, in front of a room full of people. She handled it with more grace than he'll ever know, but this isn't just about one night. It's about a system that lets men like him think they can treat people like her as less than human. I know you'll know what to do with this. Mrs. Thompson hit send, her hands steady but her heart racing. She didn't know what would come of it, but she'd learned long ago that silence was the enemy of change. Across town, Denise was at a community center, attending a meeting about workplace inequality. She'd been invited by a friend who knew her passion for justice, and there she met Jamal Carter, no relation, a community organizer researching the struggles of service industry workers. Over coffee, Denise mentioned Maya's long hours and the toll of working in a place like the Ivory Room. Jamal's eyes lit up. He'd been looking for a story to humanize his research, something to galvanize people. When Denise shared what Maya had texted her about the night's incident, Jamal knew he'd found it. The next morning, Claren Wen's article hit the New York Beacon's website. Billionaire's cruel words spark outrage, a waitress's dignity under fire. The piece detailed Maya's encounter with Richard Collins, quoting Mrs. Thompson's email and weaving in statistics about workplace discrimination in the service industry. Clara had reached out to Maya for comment, but Maya, still reeling, had declined to speak. She didn't want her pain splashed across the internet. But the story took on a life of its own. By noon, the article was trending on social media. The hashtag #RespectMaya began circulating, first on X, then across other platforms. People shared their own stories of workplace mistreatment, from servers to retail workers to delivery drivers. The Ivory Room was flooded with calls and emails, some demanding accountability, others praising Maya's strength. A viral video emerged of a young woman reenacting Maya's composure in the face of Collins's insults, captioned, "This is what resilience looks like." Maya was stunned. She'd gone to work expecting another grueling shift, only to find her co-workers whispering and customers staring, not with judgment, but with admiration. Priya pulled her into the break room, showing her the trending hashtag. "Maya, you're a hero," she said, her eyes wide. Maya shook her head, overwhelmed. "I just did my job." But the story wasn't just about Maya anymore. Jamal, the organizer, reached out to Denise, and together they planned a rally outside the Ivory Room to demand better treatment for service workers. The event drew hundreds, workers, activists, even some of the restaurant's regulars. Mrs. Thompson was there, her presence quiet but powerful, holding a sign that read, "Dignity for all." The pressure on Richard Collins was relentless. His PR team issued a generic statement about regrettable behavior, but it only fueled the fire. Social media sleuths dug into Collins's history, uncovering stories of other workers he'd belittled or fired on a whim. His company's stock dipped, and his board of directors demanded action. For the first time in his life, Collins was cornered. Then came the twist. In a televised press conference, Collins stepped up to a podium, his face pale, his usual swagger gone. "I was wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "What I said to Maya Carter was cruel and unacceptable. It came from a place of privilege I've never questioned. I'm sorry, not just to Maya, but to everyone I've ever made feel small." The room was silent. Maya, watching from her apartment with Denise, felt her breath catch. An apology was the last thing she'd expected. But Collins wasn't done. "I've spoken to my team," he continued, "and I want to make this right. Maya, if you're watching, I'd like to meet with you. Not to save face, but to listen. And I want to fund an organization, led by you, to support service workers like yourself. You deserve better. We all do." The internet exploded. Some called it a publicity stunt, others a genuine redemption. Maya didn't know what to believe. She'd spent her life distrusting men like Collins, men who saw people like her as disposable. But the offer was real. Legal documents arrived the next day, outlining a partnership to create the Dignity Fund, a non-profit dedicated to providing resources, training, and advocacy for marginalized workers in the service industry. Maya took a week to decide. She sat with Denise, Priya, and Mrs. Thompson, weighing the risks and possibilities. "What if he's just trying to buy his way out?" she asked, her voice heavy with doubt. Mrs. Thompson, her eyes sharp, leaned forward. "Then you make him prove it. You take his money and build something so powerful it outlives him. You don't do it for him, you do it for you, and for every worker who's ever been made to feel less. Denise squeezed her daughter's hand. You've always been a fighter, Maya. This is your chance to fight for more than just yourself. Maya met with Collins in a quiet office, flanked by her lawyer, a friend of Mrs. Thompson's. Collins was subdued, almost nervous. He listened as Maya laid out her vision, not just for the Dignity Fund, but for a world where workers like her were seen, valued, and respected. To her surprise, he agreed to her terms: full creative control for Maya, a board of diverse voices, and a commitment to transparency. The Dignity Fund launched 3 months later, with Maya at the helm. It offered scholarships, mental health support, and legal aid for service workers across the country. The Ivory Room implemented new training on workplace respect, and other restaurants followed suit. Maya's nonprofit for at-risk youth became a reality too, a sister organization to the Dignity Fund, with Priya designing its vibrant logo. The movement grew, with #RespectMaya evolving into #RespectUsAll, a rallying cry for workers everywhere. Maya's story inspired legislation in New York to protect service workers from harassment, and her face appeared on magazine covers, her smile radiant but grounded. She never forgot the night that started it all: the pain, the resilience, the quiet power of standing tall. One evening, as Maya stood in the new office of the Dignity Fund, looking out over the city, she felt a weight lift. She thought of her mother, of Mrs. Thompson, of every worker who'd ever been told they didn't belong. She thought of her own voice, steady and unbroken, in the face of cruelty. And she smiled. One voice, she whispered, one stand for dignity, can create a ripple of change. We are all worth fighting for.